The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Westminster Abbey like memories refusing to fade. Queen Isabella Charlotte stood at her bedroom window in Buckingham Palace, watching the early November sun struggle through the gray London sky. Today was different from all the ceremonial duties she had performed in her 3 years as queen consort. Today, she would walk among heroes. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the simple black coat hanging in her wardrobe. The trembling had nothing to do with the cold autumn air and everything to do with the weight of what lay ahead. The field of remembrance ceremony was more than a royal obligation. It was a sacred trust between the crown and those who had sacrificed everything for their country. Isabella had married King Henry 8 years ago, but becoming queen consort 3 years earlier had changed everything. She was no longer just the woman who had captured the heart of a future king. She was now the living symbol of a nation's gratitude to its fallen heroes. The responsibility felt heavier than any crown jewel. Her lady-in-waiting, Margaret, knocked softly on the door. "Your Majesty, the car will be ready in 30 minutes. "Thank you, Margaret. Please ensure the wreaths are properly arranged and confirm that we have the list of veteran families attending today." As Margaret hurried away, Isabella returned to her reflection in the mirror. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple chignon, and she wore minimal makeup. Today was not about royal glamour. It was about honoring the memory of brave souls and comforting those they left behind. The drive through London's busy streets gave Isabella time to review her notes. She had spent weeks preparing for this day, reading the stories of veterans who would be present, memorizing names and service details. Each story was a testament to courage that humbled her completely. There was James Morrison, 83 years old, who had served in Korea and lost his best friend saving wounded soldiers under heavy fire. Sarah Chun, a 45-year-old veteran of Afghanistan, who returned home with injuries that ended her military career, but not her spirit. Robert Williams, 78, whose father died in World War II and whose son served in Iraq. 3 generations of service in one family. The car slowed as they approached Westminster. Through the window, Isabella could see crowds gathering behind barriers, some holding small British flags, others clutching photographs of loved ones lost in service. Her heart ached seeing elderly women in their best coats, medals pinned proudly to their chests, standing beside middle-aged children who had grown up without fathers or mothers. "Your Majesty, we're approaching the ceremonial entrance," announced Detective Inspector Collins, her personal protection officer. Isabella nodded, taking a deep breath. She had learned early in her royal duties that authenticity mattered more than perfect protocol. These veterans and their families could sense when someone truly cared versus when someone was simply going through the motions. Today, she was determined to honor their sacrifice with genuine respect and attention. The car stopped at the designated area near Westminster Abbey. Through the window, Isabella could see the field of remembrance spread out before her. Thousands of small wooden crosses planted in neat rows, each one representing a life lost in service to Britain. Red poppies adorned many of the crosses, their vibrant color a stark contrast against the gray November day. As her door opened, the first thing that struck Isabella was not the assembled dignitaries or the carefully choreographed ceremony setup, but the faces in the crowd. Weathered faces that had seen too much, young faces marked by loss, proud faces that refused to let grief overcome honor. These were the people who truly understood the cost of freedom. Isabella stepped out of the car with practiced grace, but her eyes were already seeking out the veterans in the gathering crowd. She spotted a young woman in a wheelchair, her left leg missing below the knee, wearing a crisp military uniform decorated with service medals. Beside her stood an older man whose empty sleeve was pinned neatly to his jacket, his remaining hand resting protectively on the young woman's shoulder. Colonel Patricia Henley, the ceremony coordinator, approached with a respectful bow. "Your Majesty, we're honored by your presence today. The veterans are particularly excited to meet you." "The honor is entirely mine, Colonel," Isabella replied, meaning every word. "Please, introduce me to as many of them as possible." I want to hear their stories. As they walked toward the ceremonial area, Isabella noticed a small group of children holding handmade cards. Their teacher, a woman in her 30s wearing a veteran's pin, was explaining something to them in hushed tones. Isabella approached the group, causing the children to straighten up with wide eyes. "Good morning, children. Those are beautiful cards you've made." A little girl with pigtails stepped forward bravely. "Your Majesty, we made these for the soldiers who can't come home." Isabella knelt down to the child's level, her formal protocol forgotten. "That's very thoughtful of you. I'm sure they will be very proud to know that brave children like you remember them." The teacher stepped forward. "Your Majesty, I'm Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, retired. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan before becoming a teacher." Isabella rose and shook Sarah's hand warmly. "Thank you for your service, Lieutenant Mitchell. And thank you for teaching these children about the importance of remembrance." Sarah's eyes brightened. "My students wanted to do something special for Remembrance Day. We've been studying the history of military service, and they asked if they could make cards for the veterans. Would you mind if I helped deliver some of these cards to the veterans here today?" Isabella asked, causing the children to gasp with excitement. As Isabella moved through the crowd with the children, she began to understand something profound about the ceremony. It wasn't just about honoring the dead. It was about connecting the living. The veterans she met weren't looking for pity or sympathy. They wanted recognition for their service and assurance that their sacrifices had meaning. She stopped at a bench where an elderly man sat alone, staring at a particular cross in the field. His hands shook slightly as he held a faded photograph. Isabella approached quietly, not wanting to intrude on what was clearly a private moment. "Excuse me, sir. I'm Queen Isabella. Might I sit with you for a moment?" The man looked up, startled. "Your Majesty, please, of course." He started to stand, but Isabella gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "Please stay seated. I could see you're visiting someone special." The man's voice was thick with emotion. "My son, Tommy. He was 22 when he died in Afghanistan. Best lad you could ask for, always helping others, always making people laugh." Isabella looked at the photograph in his hands. It showed a young soldier with bright eyes and a mischievous grin, clearly full of life and hope. "He looks like he was wonderful. What was he like growing up?" For the next 15 minutes, the old man told Isabella stories about Tommy, how he rescued stray cats, how he learned to cook just to help his mother when she was sick, how he wrote letters to his little sister every week while deployed. Isabella listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed she truly cared about learning who Tommy had been as a person, not just as a soldier. When their conversation ended, the man was wiping tears from his eyes, but he was smiling. "Thank you, Your Majesty. Most people want to talk about how he died, but you asked about how he lived." As Isabella continued through the ceremony, she realized this was what made the difference between empty royal gestures and meaningful connection. The veterans and their families didn't need her to understand their exact experiences. They needed her to recognize their humanity and honor their stories. She met Maria Santos, whose husband died in a roadside bombing in Iraq, leaving her to raise 3 children alone. Maria had started a support group for military widows and was now helping dozens of other families navigate their grief and practical challenges. "Your Majesty," Maria said, "people think we want pity, but what we really want is for our husbands' deaths to have meaning. When we help other families, when we teach children about service and sacrifice, that's how we honor their memory." Isabella was moved by Maria's strength. "You're continuing his service in a different way. That's incredibly brave." The formal ceremony began with the traditional prayers and speeches, but Isabella found herself thinking about the individual stories she had heard. When it came time to lay the official wreath, she carried with her the memory of every conversation, every tear, every proud smile she had witnessed. As she placed the wreath at the base of the Cross of Remembrance, Isabella whispered a private promise. "I will remember not just your sacrifice, but your lives, your loves, your dreams. You will not be forgotten." The crowd was silent except for the distant sound of London traffic and the occasional cry of a gull overhead. In that moment, Isabella felt the full weight of her role as queen consort. She wasn't just representing the royal family. She was the living embodiment of her nation's promise to never forget those who had given everything for freedom. After the formal ceremony concluded, Isabella insisted on staying longer than the scheduled time. She wanted to speak with more veterans, hear more stories, and ensure that every family who wanted to meet her had the opportunity. She sat with a group of young veterans who had served together in Afghanistan. They told her about their camaraderie, their fears, their hopes for the future. Some struggled with physical injuries, others with invisible wounds that were harder to explain, but just as real. "Your Majesty," said David, a former sergeant with scars across his face, "sometimes people look at us like we're broken. But we're not broken. We're different now, but we're still fighting, just in different ways." Isabella nodded thoughtfully. "What kind of support would make the biggest difference for veterans like you?" The group exchanged glances before David continued. "Jobs that matter, Your Majesty. We want to keep serving our country, just not necessarily in uniform. And we want people to understand that we're not victims. We're survivors who have skills and experience that can help build a better Britain." As the afternoon wore on, Isabella found herself energized rather than exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Each conversation had taught her something new about courage, resilience, and the true meaning of service. When her security team finally indicated it was time to leave, Isabella felt a profound reluctance to go. She had come to the ceremony thinking she was there to honor the veterans, but she realized they had honored her with their trust, their stories, and their examples of how to face life's greatest challenges with dignity and purpose. As her car pulled away from Westminster, Isabella looked back at the field of remembrance one more time. The crosses stood in silent testimony to sacrifice, but the living veterans she had met today represented something equally important: the ongoing promise that such sacrifice would never be in vain. The drive back to Buckingham Palace gave Isabella time to process everything she had experienced. She knew that this ceremony had changed her understanding of what it meant to serve as queen consort. Her role wasn't just about attending events and supporting charities. It was about being a bridge between the institution of monarchy and the real people whose lives gave meaning to that institution. Margaret was waiting when Isabella returned to the palace. "How was the ceremony, Your Majesty?" Isabella paused, still wearing her simple black coat, her hair slightly disheveled from the November wind. "It was one of the most important days of my life, Margaret, and I have a great deal of work to do." That evening, as Isabella sat in her private study, making notes about everything she had learned, she began to formulate plans. The ceremony was over, but her real work was just beginning. The veterans had trusted her with their stories. Now she had to prove worthy of that trust by turning their words into meaningful action. The clock chimed midnight as Isabella finally set down her pen. Tomorrow, she would begin a new chapter of her reign as queen consort, one focused not on ceremony and protocol, but on the sacred duty of ensuring that those who had served their country received the honor and support they deserved. Outside her window, London slept peacefully, protected by the sacrifices of heroes both remembered and forgotten. But in the palace, a queen was wide awake, planning how to transform one powerful day into lasting change for the brave men and women who had given everything for their country's freedom. 3 weeks after the Field of Remembrance ceremony, Queen Isabella stood in the grand conference room at Buckingham Palace, facing a table full of government officials, charity leaders, and military commanders. The room buzzed with the nervous energy that always accompanied high-level meetings, but Isabella felt calm and determined. The stories she had heard from veterans had given her a clarity of purpose that no amount of royal training could have provided. "Ladies and gentlemen," Isabella began, setting aside the formal speech her advisors had prepared. 3 weeks ago, I had the privilege of attending the Field of Remembrance ceremony at Westminster. What I experienced there was not just a ceremonial duty, but a wake-up call about our responsibilities to those who have served our nation. Sir Reginald Hartwell, the palace's chief advisor, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Isabella had already informed him that this meeting would be different from the usual polite discussions about royal patronages and charitable appearances. Today, she intended to propose real action. "Your Majesty," Sir Reginald interjected diplomatically, "while your enthusiasm for veteran affairs is admirable, we must remember that the royal family's role is traditionally more symbolic than directly interventionist in policy matters." Isabella had expected this response. She had spent years learning to navigate the delicate balance between royal influence and political neutrality. But the faces she had seen at Westminster, the elderly father mourning his son, the young woman in a wheelchair, the teacher who had traded military service for educating the next generation, had convinced her that some issues transcended political boundaries. "Sir Reginald, I'm not proposing that the crown involve itself in partisan politics. I'm suggesting that we use our unique position to highlight and support initiatives that already have broad public support across party lines. Supporting veterans is not a political stance. It's a moral imperative." General Patricia Morrison, the highest-ranking woman in the British Army, leaned forward with interest. Isabella had specifically requested her presence at this meeting, knowing that any meaningful veteran support program would need military backing. "Your Majesty, what specific initiatives do you have in mind?" General Morrison asked. Isabella opened the leather portfolio she had spent weeks preparing. Inside were detailed notes from her conversations with veterans, research on existing support programs, and proposals developed with the help of several veteran advocacy groups she had quietly consulted since the ceremony. "First, I propose creating the Royal Veteran Skills Initiative, a program that connects transitioning military personnel with employers who specifically value military experience. During my conversations at Westminster, I learned that many veterans feel their military skills aren't properly recognized or translated to civilian careers." Lady Catherine Wells, representing the Department for Work and Pensions, looked skeptical. "Your Majesty, we already have several employment programs for veterans. Adding another layer of bureaucracy might actually complicate rather than improve the situation." Isabella had anticipated this concern as well. "Lady Wells, I'm not suggesting we create new bureaucracy. Instead, I propose we leverage the unique convening power of the royal family to bring together existing programs under a coordinated umbrella. When the palace endorses an initiative, it attracts attention and resources that might not otherwise be available." She turned to the next page of her proposal. The second initiative focuses on veteran families. "I met a widow named Maria Santos who has created an incredible support network for military families who have lost loved ones. Her work is entirely volunteer-based and desperately underfunded. The Royal Veterans Family Support Network would provide grants and resources to grassroots organizations like Maria's." Dr. James Whitfield, representing the Department of Health, raised his hand. "Your Majesty, what about mental health support? That seems to be an increasingly critical issue for returning veterans." Isabella's expression grew more serious. "That brings me to the third pillar of what I'm proposing. The Royal Mental Health Initiative for Veterans would fund specialized treatment programs and, crucially, work to reduce the stigma around seeking help. Too many veterans suffer in silence because they fear being seen as weak or broken." She looked around the room, making eye contact with each person present. "I met young veterans who told me they're tired of being viewed as victims or charity cases. They want to continue serving their country, just in different capacities. This isn't about pity. It's about recognizing that military experience creates skills and perspectives that can benefit all of British society." Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, these are ambitious goals, but implementing such programs would require significant funding and coordination across multiple government departments. The palace doesn't typically take on such complex administrative responsibilities." Isabella had prepared for this objection by studying how other members of the royal family had successfully launched major initiatives. "Sir Reginald, I'm proposing that we work exactly as we do with our existing charitable patronages, but with greater focus and coordination. The palace would provide royal endorsement, host fundraising events, and use our platform to raise awareness. The actual program administration would be handled by existing charities and government departments. She opened to another section of her proposal. I've already had preliminary discussions with several organizations. Help for Heroes is interested in expanding their employment services. Combat Stress wants to develop new mental health programs. The Royal British Legion is eager to modernize their family support services. We would be coordinating and amplifying existing efforts, not creating entirely new institutions. General Morrison nodded approvingly. Your Majesty, this approach makes sense from a military perspective. We already struggle with coordination between different support services. Having a central coordinating body with royal backing could significantly improve efficiency. Isabella felt a surge of encouragement. General, I was hoping you might consider becoming the military liaison for these initiatives. Your experience and credibility would be invaluable in ensuring the programs actually meet veterans' needs rather than what we think their needs might be. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Isabella patiently addressing each concern and objection raised by the assembled officials. She had done her homework thoroughly, consulting with veterans, researching successful programs in other countries, and developing realistic implementation timelines. When the meeting concluded, Isabella had secured tentative agreement from most departments to participate in a 6-month pilot program. More importantly, she had convinced the skeptics that this wasn't a naive royal impulse, but a carefully considered initiative based on genuine understanding of veteran needs. As the officials filed out of the conference room, General Morrison lingered behind. Your Majesty, if I may speak frankly, I'm impressed by the depth of your preparation and understanding. Many well-meaning people want to help veterans without truly listening to what veterans actually need. Isabella smiled, remembering her conversation with the elderly father at Westminster. General, 3 weeks ago, a man told me about his son Tommy. Not about how he died, but about how he lived. That conversation taught me that honoring veterans means seeing them as complete human beings with stories, dreams, and contributions that extend far beyond their military service. Over the following weeks, Isabella threw herself into the development of her veteran initiatives with an energy that surprised even her closest advisors. She scheduled private meetings with veteran families, visited existing support programs, and spent hours learning about the practical challenges facing transitioning military personnel. One particularly memorable afternoon, she visited a job training center in East London that specialized in helping veterans develop civilian career skills. The center was located in a converted warehouse and looked nothing like the polished venues where Isabella typically conducted royal business. Your Majesty, said Frank Reynolds, the center director and a veteran of the Falklands War, this isn't exactly a palace, but these programs are changing lives. Isabella looked around the bustling workspace where veterans learned everything from computer programming to construction skills. Frank, this is exactly where I need to be. How can we expand programs like this? Frank led her through the facility, introducing her to veterans at various stages of their career transitions. Isabella met Sarah, a former Army mechanic learning advanced automotive technology. She spoke with David, a former intelligence officer retraining as a cybersecurity specialist. Each conversation reinforced her conviction that veterans possessed valuable skills that civilian employers were often too short-sighted to recognize. The biggest challenge, Frank explained, is convincing employers that military experience translates to civilian success. Too many people think veterans can only work in security or manual labor jobs. Isabella took notes constantly, asking detailed questions about funding needs, employer outreach strategies, and success measurement criteria. She was beginning to understand that effective royal patronage required much more than ceremonial appearances and charitable donations. That evening, Isabella met privately with Maria Santos, the military widow she had encountered at Westminster. They sat in Maria's modest living room, surrounded by photographs of her late husband and certificates from the support groups she had organized. Maria, I want to understand exactly how your support network operates and What resources would make the biggest difference for the families you help? Maria was initially intimidated by having the Queen consort in her home, but Isabella's genuine interest and informal manner soon put her at ease. Your Majesty, most of the families I work with aren't looking for handouts. They need practical help, assistance with paperwork, connections to job opportunities, someone who understands what they're going through. What's your biggest challenge in expanding the program? Isabella asked. Maria hesitated, then spoke honestly. Funding for basic things, travel expenses for volunteers, printing costs for information materials, rental fees for meeting spaces. We do everything on a shoestring budget because most of us are barely getting by ourselves. Isabella made careful notes. What if you had reliable funding for those basic operational needs? How many more families could you help? We could easily triple our reach, Maria said with growing excitement. There are so many isolated military families who don't even know support networks exist. With proper resources, we could create regional chapters across the country. As Isabella left Maria's home that night, she felt both humbled and energized. The widow had shown her that meaningful change didn't always require massive government programs or elaborate institutional structures. Sometimes the most effective help came from people who had experienced loss themselves and were willing to share their strength with others. The next morning brought Isabella's first major challenge. The Times newspaper had run a critical editorial questioning whether the royal family should be involving itself so directly in what they termed social engineering projects. The article suggested that Isabella's veteran initiatives were inappropriate royal activism that overstepped constitutional boundaries. Sir Reginald arrived at Isabella's office with the newspaper and a concerned expression. Your Majesty, this editorial is being discussed throughout Westminster. Some government ministers are expressing concerns about the political implications of your initiatives. Isabella had been expecting this kind of pushback. She had studied the careers of other royal family members who had successfully championed social causes while maintaining political neutrality. Sir Reginald, supporting veterans is not a partisan political position. Every major party in Parliament claims to support our military personnel. We're simply helping coordinate and amplify that support. The concern, Sir Reginald continued carefully, is that your involvement might inadvertently highlight government failures in veteran care, creating political embarrassment for the current administration. Isabella considered this carefully. She knew that effective royal leadership required balancing authentic advocacy with diplomatic sensitivity. What if we frame this differently? Instead of highlighting problems, we focus on celebrating successes and helping replicate them more widely. She had learned from her conversations with veterans that many of them were uncomfortable with being portrayed as victims of government neglect. They preferred being seen as capable individuals who could contribute to solutions rather than passive recipients of charity. Sir Reginald, arrange a meeting with the Prime Minister. I want to discuss how these initiatives can support government objectives rather than creating political complications. The meeting with Prime Minister Jonathan Clark took place the following week in his office at number 10, Downing Street. Isabella arrived with General Morrison and a detailed presentation showing how royal support could enhance existing government programs without duplicating efforts or creating administrative conflicts. Prime Minister, Isabella began, I believe there's an opportunity to demonstrate British leadership in veteran care while supporting your government's economic objectives. Veterans represent a skilled workforce that can contribute significantly to national productivity if we provide appropriate transition support. Prime Minister Clark, a pragmatic politician who had served briefly in the military himself, listened with interest. Your Majesty, I appreciate your concern for our veterans. My worry is that royal involvement might create unrealistic expectations or inadvertently criticize existing government efforts. Isabella had prepared for this concern. Prime Minister, what if we position this as celebrating and expanding successful government programs rather than creating alternative systems? The royal endorsement could help attract private sector investment and volunteer support that supplements public funding without replacing it. General Morrison added, Prime Minister, from a military perspective, having royal support for veteran transition programs would significantly boost morale among active service members. When soldiers know their future welfare is personally important to the royal family, it strengthens their commitment to current service. The meeting continued for nearly an hour, with Isabella demonstrating both her detailed understanding of the issues and her sensitivity to political realities. By the end of the discussion, Prime Minister Clark had agreed to support a formal launch of the Royal Veterans Initiative with appropriate government coordination. As Isabella left Downing Street, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had successfully navigated the complex intersection of royal influence, political sensitivity, and genuine social need. More importantly, she had remained true to the promise she had made to herself at Westminster to ensure that the veteran story she had heard would translate into meaningful action. That evening, Isabella called Maria Santos with news about the government support for veteran family programs. Maria's excitement was infectious, and Isabella found herself laughing with genuine joy for the first time since the challenging newspaper editorial had been published. "Your Majesty," Maria said through tears of happiness, "you've kept your promise. These programs are going to change so many lives." Isabella realized that Maria was right about the promise, but perhaps not in the way she intended. The promise Isabella had made at Westminster wasn't just about creating programs or securing funding. It was about proving that the royal family's relationship with the people they serve could be authentic, meaningful, and transformative for everyone involved. As she prepared for bed that night, Isabella reflected on how much her understanding of royal duty had evolved since the field of remembrance ceremony. She had learned that true service meant listening more than speaking, learning more than teaching, and using privilege as a platform for amplifying voices that might otherwise go unheard. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Isabella faced them with confidence born from experience. She had discovered that the most effective royal leadership came not from maintaining distance and formality, but from building genuine relationships based on mutual respect and shared commitment to something larger than individual interests. The veterans had taught her that courage meant continuing to serve even when the mission changed, even when the uniform came off, even when nobody was watching. Now Isabella understood that her own service as queen consort required the same kind of courage. The willingness to use her position not for personal comfort or political safety, but for the benefit of those who had given everything for their country. 6 months had passed since Queen Isabella launched the Royal Veterans Initiative, and the early results exceeded everyone's expectations. The program had successfully placed over 400 veterans in meaningful civilian careers, provided support to 150 military families, and funded mental health services for nearly 200 former service members. But for Isabella, the statistics were less important than the individual stories of transformation she witnessed every week. On a crisp May morning, Isabella stood in the newly opened Royal Veteran Skills Center in Birmingham, watching former Army Sergeant Jennifer Walsh demonstrate advanced manufacturing techniques to a group of civilian trainees. Jennifer had lost her left arm in an improvised explosive device blast in Afghanistan 3 years earlier, but her expertise in precision engineering had made her one of the center's most sought-after instructors. "Your Majesty," Jennifer said during a break between training sessions, "when I first came home, everyone focused on what I couldn't do anymore. This program helped me realize that my military experience taught me skills that most civilians never get the chance to learn." Isabella smiled, remembering her first conversation with Jennifer at the Westminster ceremony. Then, Jennifer had been struggling with depression and unemployment, feeling like damaged goods that society preferred to hide. Now she was training the next generation of British manufacturers while pursuing an engineering degree through the program's education benefits. "Jennifer, you're not just teaching technical skills. You're showing everyone here what resilience and determination look like in practice." The Birmingham Center was one of 5 regional facilities that had opened since the initiative's launch. Each center offered different specializations based on local economic needs and veteran populations. The Manchester Center focused on information technology and cybersecurity. The Cardiff Center specialized in renewable energy technologies. The Glasgow Center emphasized advanced healthcare training. The Newcastle Center developed expertise in maritime and offshore industries. What made the centers unique wasn't just their technical training programs, but their approach to addressing the complete transition from military to civilian life. Each center included counseling services, family support programs, and ongoing mentorship networks that connected new veterans with those who had successfully made the transition. Isabella's next stop was the center's family support wing, where she found Maria Santos conducting a workshop for military spouses dealing with their partner's career transitions. Maria's grassroots support network had grown into a professionally managed program serving families across the Midlands region. "Your Majesty," Maria called out as Isabella entered the room. "Perfect timing. We're discussing how families can be partners in the transition process rather than just passive supporters." Isabella took a seat among the spouses, listening as Maria facilitated a discussion about the challenges of maintaining family stability during career changes. The conversation was honest and sometimes painful, with participants sharing struggles with financial stress, relationship tensions, and children's adjustment difficulties. "The hardest part," said Rebecca, whose husband was transitioning from military police work to civilian law enforcement, "is feeling like I don't understand his experiences, but he expects me to automatically understand his needs." Another spouse, Caroline, nodded in agreement. "My husband gets frustrated when I don't instantly recognize why certain situations trigger his anxiety. I want to help, but I don't know how." Isabella found herself drawn into the conversation, sharing insights she had gained from her extensive conversations with veterans and their families. "What I've learned is that understanding doesn't always require shared experience. Sometimes the most helpful thing is simply acknowledging that someone's experiences are valid, even if we can't fully comprehend them ourselves." Maria added, "That's exactly right, Your Majesty. These workshops help families develop communication skills and coping strategies that work for their specific situations." After the workshop, Isabella spent time reviewing program statistics with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the former teacher and Afghanistan veteran who now served as the initiative's director of family services. Sarah had left her teaching position 6 months earlier to oversee the expansion of family support programs across all regional centers. "Sarah, the numbers are impressive, but what's your assessment of the program's real impact on family stability?" Dr. Mitchell pulled out a comprehensive report she had prepared for Isabella's visit. "Your Majesty, we're tracking several key indicators. Divorce rates among program participants are significantly lower than the general veteran population. Children's academic performance is improving in families that participate in our support programs. Most importantly, family members report feeling more confident about their ability to navigate challenges together." Isabella studied the data carefully. "What are the biggest remaining challenges?" "Geographic reach," Sarah replied without hesitation. "We're having great success in urban areas near our centers, but rural veterans and their families often can't access our services. We need to develop mobile outreach programs or satellite locations." Isabella made notes about the rural access issue, adding it to her growing list of program expansions to discuss with government partners. "What about resistance from veterans who don't want to participate in formal programs?" "That's actually less of a problem than we anticipated," Sarah said. "The peer-to-peer nature of our programs helps. When veterans see other veterans succeeding in the civilian world, they're more willing to seek help. The key is making sure the programs feel like professional development rather than therapy or charity." Isabella's afternoon was spent visiting individual success stories throughout the Birmingham region. Her first stop was a small manufacturing company where 5 program graduates now worked as precision machinists and quality control specialists. The company owner, Margaret Thompson, had initially been skeptical about hiring veterans. "Your Majesty," Margaret explained, "I had typical civilian misconceptions about veterans. I worried they might have mental health issues or struggle with civilian workplace culture. The Royal Veterans Initiative helped me understand that military experience actually creates exactly the kind of employees every business needs. People with strong work ethics, problem-solving skills, and ability to perform under pressure. Isabella watched the veterans working alongside civilian colleagues with obvious mutual respect and camaraderie. What convinced you to participate in the hiring program? Honestly, Your Majesty, it was desperation, Margaret laughed. I couldn't find qualified workers through traditional hiring methods. The Veterans Program provided pre-trained candidates who were more skilled than most of my other employees. Now I specifically recruit through the program because I know the quality of candidates will be exceptional. This was exactly the kind of economic argument that Isabella had hoped would drive program expansion. When businesses discovered that hiring veterans improved their bottom line rather than creating charitable obligations, sustainable employment opportunities would multiply naturally. Her next visit was to a small consulting firm started by 3 program alumni who had combined their military expertise with civilian business training to create a successful cybersecurity company. Former Captain David Harrison, former Sergeant Lisa Chun, and former Lieutenant Michael Roberts had met during their transition training and discovered complementary skills that made them natural business partners. Your Majesty, David explained, the program didn't just help us find jobs, it taught us how to translate our military experience into civilian business language. We learned to market our expertise in ways that civilian clients could understand and value. Lisa added, military people are natural entrepreneurs because we're trained to solve problems with limited resources and adapt quickly to changing situations. The program helped us recognize those skills as business assets rather than just military capabilities. Isabella was impressed by their company's growth. In less than a year, they had secured contracts with several major corporations and were already planning to hire additional veterans as they expanded their services. What advice would you give to veterans who are hesitant about starting their own businesses? Isabella asked. Michael replied, don't think of it as starting over. Think of it as applying the same skills you used in the military to a different mission. The leadership, planning, and execution abilities are identical. You just need to learn the civilian vocabulary and business procedures. Isabella spent the evening at a program graduation ceremony where 25 veterans and 15 family members completed various training programs. The ceremony was held in a hotel conference room rather than an elaborate venue, but the sense of accomplishment and hope was tangible. Each graduate gave a brief speech about their experience and future plans. Isabella listened to stories of former combat medics becoming civilian paramedics, former logistics specialists starting transportation companies, former communications experts entering telecommunications careers, and former military police officers joining civilian law enforcement agencies. What struck Isabella most powerfully was how the graduates talked about their military service. Unlike the conversations at Westminster 6 months earlier, where many veterans seemed apologetic or defensive about their experiences, these graduates spoke with pride about both their military careers and their civilian futures. Your Majesty, said former Staff Sergeant Janet Wilson, who was starting work as a hospital administrator the following week. 6 months ago, I felt like my military service was something I needed to overcome. This program taught me that my service was preparation for civilian success, not an obstacle to it. After the ceremony, Isabella met privately with General Morrison to review the program's expansion plans. The general had become Isabella's most trusted advisor on veteran issues, helping navigate the complex relationships between military culture and civilian society. General, what's your assessment of the program's impact on military morale among active service members? General Morrison consulted her notes. Your Majesty, recruitment and retention numbers have improved noticeably since the program launched. When young people considering military service see that veterans are succeeding in civilian careers, it removes a significant barrier to enlistment. Current service members report feeling less anxiety about their eventual transitions. Isabella found this particularly gratifying. So we're not just helping current veterans, we're strengthening the entire military recruitment and retention pipeline. Exactly, Your Majesty. The program demonstrates that military service enhances rather than limits civilian career prospects. That message is especially important for attracting high-quality recruits who might otherwise choose purely civilian career paths. They discuss plans for expanding the program to additional regions and developing specialized tracks for different military occupations. The conversation also covered integration with university programs, apprenticeship systems, and professional certification processes. General, what about international interest in our model? Several allied nations have requested detailed briefings about our approach, General Morrison replied. The Canadian government is particularly interested in adapting our family support components. The Australian military wants to study our employer engagement strategies. Isabella was pleased, but not surprised by the international attention. The program's emphasis on economic benefits rather than charitable obligations offered a sustainable model that could work in different national contexts. Late that evening, Isabella returned to her hotel room and called King Henry to update him on the day's activities. Henry had been supportive of the veteran initiatives from the beginning, but his constitutional position required him to maintain greater political neutrality than Isabella's role as Queen Consort allowed. Isabella, the reports I'm receiving are universally positive. You've managed to create genuine social impact while maintaining cross-party political support. That's no small achievement. Isabella felt grateful for Henry's encouragement, but she knew the real credit belonged to the veterans themselves. Henry, all I did was listen to what veterans are telling us they needed, then help coordinate resources to meet those needs. The success comes from their determination and skills, not royal intervention. That's exactly why the program works, Henry replied. You've avoided the trap of royal charity that makes people feel like recipients rather than partners. These veterans see themselves as contributors to solutions, not beneficiaries of sympathy. As Isabella prepared for bed, she reflected on how dramatically her understanding of royal service had evolved since the Westminster ceremony. She had learned that effective leadership meant creating platforms for other people's success rather than seeking personal recognition or gratitude. The veterans had taught her that true strength came from acknowledging vulnerability and asking for help when needed. They had shown her that career transitions required both practical support and emotional courage. Most importantly, they had demonstrated that service to country didn't end with military discharge. It simply took different forms. Isabella fell asleep thinking about Jennifer Walsh teaching manufacturing skills, Maria Santos facilitating family workshops, and David Harrison building a successful business with his military colleagues. These weren't charity cases or broken people who needed fixing. They were talented individuals who had served their country with honor and were now contributing to civilian society with the same dedication and skill. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but Isabella felt confident that the Royal Veterans Initiative had established a sustainable foundation for supporting military transitions. The program had grown beyond her initial vision to become a comprehensive system that recognized veterans as valuable assets rather than social problems requiring management. More importantly, the initiative had proven that authentic royal leadership could create meaningful change without overstepping constitutional boundaries or creating political conflicts. By focusing on economic benefits and practical outcomes rather than emotional appeals or charitable sympathy, the program had built broad support across party lines and social classes. The veterans had kept their promise to serve Britain with honor and courage. Isabella had kept her promise to ensure that service was recognized, valued, and supported long after the uniforms came off. Together, they had created something that benefited not just veterans and their families, but the entire nation that was strengthened by their continued contributions to civilian society. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of the Royal Veterans Mental Health Center in London as Queen Isabella sat in a circle with 8 veterans participating in an innovative group therapy program. It had been 1 year since the Westminster ceremony that changed her understanding of royal duty, and she was visiting this specialized facility to see how the mental health component of her initiative was addressing the invisible wounds that so many veterans carried. "Your Majesty," said Dr. Amanda Foster, the center's director, "this is our weekly peer support group for veterans dealing with post-traumatic stress. Today's session focuses on rebuilding trust, both in yourself and in others." Isabella had specifically requested to observe actual therapy sessions rather than sanitized presentations. She wanted to understand the real challenges veterans faced as they worked to heal from experiences that civilian society often couldn't comprehend. The group leader was Marcus Thompson, a former Royal Marine who had completed his own therapy program and now helped facilitate sessions for newer participants. Before Her Majesty arrived, Marcus was saying, "We were discussing how civilian interactions can sometimes feel like performing a role rather than having authentic conversations." "Sarah, would you like to continue sharing your experience?" Sarah Jennings, a former Army medic who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, looked nervous about speaking in front of Isabella, but continued her story. "It's like wearing a mask all the time. People ask how I'm doing, but they want me to say fine even when I'm not. They get uncomfortable if I mention anything about my actual experiences." Isabella listened intently as Sarah described the exhausting work of managing other people's discomfort with her military service. "I understand that civilians don't know what to say about combat or losing colleagues. But pretending those experiences didn't happen makes me feel like I'm lying about who I am." Another group member, James Walsh, nodded in agreement. "The worst part is when people either treat you like a hero who can do no wrong, or like a damaged victim who might snap at any moment. Neither response acknowledges that we're just normal people who had extraordinary experiences." Isabella found herself deeply moved by the honesty of the conversation. These veterans weren't seeking pity or special treatment. They wanted recognition of their humanity and space to process their experiences without judgment. "If I may ask," Isabella said carefully, "what kind of civilian responses have been most helpful in your recovery?" The group exchanged glances before Marcus encouraged them to answer honestly. "Your Majesty, the best interactions happen when people acknowledge that they can't fully understand our experiences, but they're willing to listen without trying to fix us or make us feel better." Sarah added, "When someone says, 'I can't imagine what that was like, but I'm glad you made it home,' that feels genuine. When they say everything happens for a reason, or at least you're alive, that feels dismissive of our actual pain." Isabella made mental notes about these insights, recognizing their importance for public education about veteran mental health. "What role has this group played in your healing process?" "It's the only place where we don't have to explain or justify our experiences," James replied. "Everyone here understands that some things can't be fixed, only managed. We help each other develop coping strategies rather than pretending the problems will disappear." Dr. Foster later explained to Isabella how the peer support model had proven more effective than traditional individual therapy for many veterans. Military culture emphasizes unit cohesion and mutual support. These group sessions recreate that environment while addressing mental health challenges that military training didn't prepare them to handle. Isabella spent the afternoon touring the center's various programs. She visited art therapy sessions where veterans use creative expression to process traumatic memories, occupational therapy workshops that help participants develop new life skills, and family counseling programs that included spouses and children in the healing process. In the art therapy studio, she met Robert Davies, a former helicopter pilot whose hands shook too severely for him to return to aviation. Robert was working on a detailed painting of a sunset over mountains, a memory from a peaceful moment during his deployment in Afghanistan. "Your Majesty," Robert said, his voice still bearing traces of the Welsh accent he had never lost. "I used to think art was frivolous. Now I understand it's another form of communication. Sometimes I can paint what I can't say with words." Isabella studied Robert's painting, recognizing the skill and emotion he had invested in capturing that moment of beauty amid the chaos of war. "The detail is extraordinary, Robert. You're preserving something precious from your service." "That's exactly right, Your Majesty. Not all my memories are painful. This program helps me separate the traumatic experiences from the meaningful ones." I'm learning to honor my service without being defined by my worst moments. Isabella's next stop was the center's innovative family therapy wing, where she observed a session designed to help military families communicate about mental health challenges. The therapist, Dr. Michael Chun, was a veteran himself who specialized in family dynamics within military culture. Military families often struggle with the transition from deployment communication, brief, focused, task-oriented, to the intimate, emotional communication that healthy family relationships require. Dr. Chun explained to Isabella. The session she observed included 3 families at different stages of adjustment. One couple was dealing with a husband's recent diagnosis of PTSD. Another family was working through the behavioral changes their teenage daughter had developed while her mother deployed multiple times. The third couple was navigating the wife's career transition from military intelligence to civilian law enforcement. The common thread, Dr. Chun continued, is that military service creates communication patterns that serve survival and mission success but don't necessarily support emotional intimacy. These families are learning new ways to connect with each other. Isabella was struck by how the family supported each other across their different situations. The couple dealing with PTSD offered encouragement to the family with the struggling teenager. The woman transitioning to civilian law enforcement shared practical advice about maintaining professional identity while adapting to new environments. Later that afternoon, Isabella attended a graduation ceremony for veterans completing the center's intensive 8-week residential program. Unlike the employment program graduations she had attended, this ceremony was smaller and more intimate, reflecting the deeply personal nature of mental health recovery. Each graduate spoke briefly about their journey through the program. Their stories were different in detail, but similar in their themes of learning to live with invisible wounds while rebuilding meaningful civilian lives. Your Majesty, said former Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, who had completed treatment for severe depression and anxiety. 6 months ago, I couldn't leave my house without panic attacks. This program didn't make my problems disappear, but it gave me tools to manage them. Now I'm starting college to become a counselor myself. Isabella was moved by Lisa's determination to transform her healing journey into a way to help other veterans. Lisa, your experience will make you an incredibly effective counselor. You understand what your future clients are experiencing. Another graduate, former Captain William Murphy, had struggled with survivor's guilt after losing several soldiers under his command in Iraq. Your Majesty, the hardest lesson was learning that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding ways to honor our lost colleagues while building meaningful lives. I'm returning to my family and starting a foundation to support families of fallen soldiers. After the ceremony, Isabella met privately with Dr. Foster to discuss the center's outcomes and expansion plans. The facility had treated over 300 veterans since opening, with remarkable success rates in both clinical improvement and civilian reintegration. Dr. Foster, what factors contribute most to successful treatment outcomes? 3 key elements, Your Majesty. First, peer support from other veterans who understand the experiences. Second, family involvement in the healing process. Third, future-focused therapy that helps veterans build new identities rather than just processing past trauma. Isabella reviewed the center's data, showing that veterans who completed the full program had significantly lower rates of suicide, substance abuse, and family breakdown compared to those who received only traditional mental health services. What about veterans who are resistant to seeking treatment? Isabella asked. That remains our biggest challenge, Dr. Foster admitted. Military culture still stigmatizes mental health treatment as weakness. We're working on outreach programs that frame therapy as professional development rather than medical treatment. Isabella found this approach fascinating. How do you position mental health treatment as professional development? We emphasize skills like stress management, communication, leadership under pressure, and performance optimization. These are competencies that benefit both civilian careers and personal relationships. Veterans respond better when they see therapy as enhancing their capabilities rather than fixing their deficits. That evening, Isabella attended a fundraising dinner for the Mental Health Center, where she had the opportunity to speak with major donors and community leaders about the importance of veteran mental health support. The dinner was held at a historic London hotel, and the attendees included business leaders, military commanders, government officials, and celebrities who supported veteran causes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Isabella said in her keynote address, "1 year ago, I learned that supporting our veterans requires more than ceremonial recognition or charitable donations. It requires understanding that military service creates both visible and invisible wounds that deserve comprehensive care." She spoke about the veterans she had met throughout the year, carefully protecting their privacy while sharing the insights their stories had provided. "These remarkable individuals taught me that strength and vulnerability are not opposites. They're complementary aspects of the human experience. Asking for help when needed is not weakness. It is wisdom." The dinner raised over £500,000 for program expansion, but Isabella was more pleased by the conversations she had with potential donors who committed to ongoing involvement rather than one-time contributions. Margaret Whitman, CEO of a major technology company, approached Isabella after the dinner. "Your Majesty, my company is interested in developing a corporate partnership with a mental health center. We want to train our managers to better support veteran employees who might be dealing with service-related mental health challenges." This was exactly the kind of systemic change Isabella hoped her initiative would inspire. "Margaret, that sounds like a model that other companies could replicate. Would you be willing to share your program development with other corporate partners?" "Absolutely, Your Majesty. We're learning that supporting veteran mental health isn't just good corporate citizenship. It's good business. Veterans bring valuable skills, but they perform best when their employers understand their needs." Isabella's final stop of the day was an unscheduled visit to the center's Emergency Crisis Intervention Unit. Dr. Foster had mentioned that the facility maintained 24-hour services for veterans experiencing mental health emergencies, and Isabella wanted to understand this critical component of the program. The crisis unit was located in a separate, quieter wing of the building, designed to provide immediate support for veterans in psychological distress. Isabella observed the intake process for a young veteran who had been brought in by concerned family members after expressing suicidal thoughts. "Your Majesty," explained Dr. Rachel Green, the crisis intervention coordinator, "about 30% of our emergency cases are veterans who have never previously sought mental health treatment. Crisis situations often provide the first opportunity to connect resistant individuals with ongoing support services." Isabella watched as trained counselors worked with the young veteran and his family, providing immediate stabilization while developing a comprehensive treatment plan. The process was professional but deeply compassionate, treating the crisis as a medical emergency that required both immediate intervention and long-term follow-up. "Dr. Green, what's the most important factor in preventing veteran suicides?" "Connection, Your Majesty. Veterans who maintain strong relationships with other veterans, family members, or community organizations have much lower suicide rates. Isolation is the biggest risk factor, which is why our programs emphasize building support networks rather than just providing individual therapy." As Isabella returned to Buckingham Palace that evening, she reflected on everything she had learned about the complex intersection of military service and mental health. The veterans she had met weren't broken people who needed fixing. They were individuals learning to integrate extraordinary experiences into ordinary civilian lives. She thought about Sarah Jennings' frustration with wearing masks in civilian interactions, Robert Davies' discovery that art could communicate what words couldn't express, and Lisa Rodriguez's determination to help other veterans by becoming a counselor herself. These stories reinforced Isabella's understanding that effective royal leadership meant creating space for authentic human experiences rather than promoting sanitized public relations narratives. The veterans had trusted her with their vulnerabilities because she had approached them with genuine curiosity rather than preconceived solutions. Isabella called Henry to update him on her visit to the mental health center. "Henry, these programs are doing more than treating individual veterans. They're changing how British society understands and respond to service-related mental health challenges." Isabella, that's exactly what sustainable royal impact looks like. You're not just providing services, you're changing cultural attitudes and institutional responses. As she prepared for sleep, Isabella reviewed her notes from the day and began planning follow-up actions. She wanted to work with Dr. Foster to develop a public education campaign about veteran mental health that could reduce stigma and increase civilian understanding. She planned to connect Margaret Whitman with other corporate leaders interested in developing veteran-friendly workplace policies. Most importantly, she wanted to ensure that the mental health center's successful models could be replicated in other regions, bringing specialized veteran mental health services closer to rural and underserved populations. The veterans had taught her that healing was not about returning to an unchanged past, but about building a meaningful future that honored both service experiences and civilian possibilities. Isabella's role was to ensure that British society provided the support, understanding, and opportunities necessary for that healing to flourish. The rain had stopped, and London sparkled under the streetlights as Isabella finally turned off her desk lamp and headed to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to expand support for veterans dealing with the invisible wounds of service. But tonight, she felt confident that the foundation was solid and the mission was clear, ensuring that no veteran faced their struggles alone and that their service to Britain continued to be valued long after their uniforms were put away. The morning of November 11th dawned clear and crisp, exactly 2 years after the Westminster ceremony that had transformed Queen Isabella's understanding of royal service. As she stood once again at her bedroom window in Buckingham Palace, watching the early light illuminate the London skyline, Isabella reflected on how profoundly everything had changed, not just for her, but for the thousands of veterans whose lives have been touched by the Royal Veterans Initiative. Today's Remembrance Day ceremony would be different. For the first time, the Field of Remembrance would include a special section dedicated to living veterans and their ongoing service to Britain in civilian roles. The Royal Veterans Initiative had grown into a comprehensive national program that was being studied and replicated by countries around the world. Margaret knocked softly on the door. "Your Majesty, the ceremonial schedule has been adjusted to include visits with program participants before the formal proceedings begin." Isabella smiled, remembering how nervous she had been 2 years ago about meeting veterans for the first time. Now, those conversations were the highlight of her royal duties. "Margaret, please ensure that we have adequate time for informal conversations. The scheduled appointments are less important than the spontaneous encounters." The drive to Westminster took Isabella through streets decorated with poppies and British flags, past buildings where her initiative had created jobs, training centers, and support services that hadn't existed 2 years earlier. The program now operated in 12 cities across Britain, had partnerships with over 200 companies, and had helped more than 2,000 veterans successfully transition to civilian careers. But for Isabella, the numbers were less meaningful than the individual transformation she had witnessed. Veterans who had been struggling with unemployment and depression were now business owners, teachers, healthcare workers, and community leaders. Military families that had been isolated and overwhelmed were now connected to support networks that provided both practical assistance and emotional understanding. Her first stop at Westminster was the new Royal Veterans Family Resource Center, a permanent facility that had been established adjacent to the traditional Field of Remembrance. The center provided year-round services for military families, including career counseling, mental health support, educational assistance, and social activities that maintained the community connections so essential to veteran well-being. Isabella entered the center to find Maria Santos conducting a workshop for military spouses about starting their own businesses. Maria's transformation over the past 2 years had been remarkable. From a grieving widow struggling to make ends meet, she had become a nationally recognized expert in military family support and had launched her own consulting company that helped organizations better serve veteran communities. "Your Majesty," Maria called out warmly, "perfect timing as always." We're discussing how military spouses can leverage their unique experiences to create businesses that serve their communities. Isabella took a seat among the participants, listening to stories of military wives who had started everything from childcare services for deployment families to consulting firms that helped companies understand veteran employees' needs. The conversation was energetic and optimistic, filled with practical advice and mutual encouragement. "Your Majesty," said Jennifer Collins, whose husband was currently deployed in Eastern Europe, "2 years ago, I felt like my only identity was military spouse. This program helped me realize that managing military family life had taught me project management, crisis response, and adaptability skills that translate perfectly to business ownership." Isabella was struck by how the women in the room supported each other across different challenges and life stages. Military spouses dealing with current deployments shared advice with veteran spouses navigating civilian career transitions. Women whose children had grown up in military families offered guidance to mothers dealing with frequent relocations and school changes. After the workshop, Isabella toured the center's other programs. The children's activity area provided after-school and summer programs specifically designed for military families, addressing the unique challenges that frequent moves and parental deployments created for young people. The Career Counseling Center had helped over 500 military spouses find meaningful employment that could accommodate military lifestyle demands. Isabella's next visit was to the expanded field of Remembrance, where traditional rows of memorial crosses now shared space with displays celebrating living veterans' contributions to civilian society. She walked through this Service Continues section, reading stories of former military personnel who were now teachers, doctors, business owners, community volunteers, and public servants. At one display, she found Robert Williams, the elderly veteran she had met 2 years earlier who had been mourning his son Tommy. Robert was now a volunteer coordinator for the program's bereaved family support services, using his experience with loss to help other parents navigating their grief. "Your Majesty," Robert said, his voice stronger than she remembered, "you asked me about Tommy's life instead of his death. That conversation started my healing process. Now I help other parents understand that our children's lives have meaning beyond their military service and beyond how they died." Isabella embraced Robert warmly, remembering the frail man who had sat alone on a bench clutching his son's photograph. "Robert, Tommy would be so proud to see how you're helping other families. You've turned your pain into purpose." "That's exactly right, Your Majesty. The grief never disappears, but it transforms into something that honors our children while helping others. Tommy's story lives on through every family I'm able to support." Isabella continued through the memorial displays, stopping to read stories of veterans who had died since the program's launch, but whose families had found comfort and community through the support services. She met with Gold Star mothers who had become advocates for other bereaved families, visited with disabled veterans who were mentoring newly injured service members, and spoke with former military chaplains who now provided spiritual guidance to veterans struggling with moral injury and survivor guilt. The formal ceremony began at 11 a.m. with the traditional 2 minutes of silence. But this year's observance included new elements that reflected the evolution of Remembrance from purely memorial to actively supportive. Representatives from each regional veteran center laid wreaths not just for the dead, but for the living veterans who continued serving their country in new capacities. Isabella's wreath-laying ceremony was followed by remarks that she had crafted to reflect everything she had learned over the past 2 years. "Today, we remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom, but we also celebrate those who returned home and continue serving Britain in classrooms, hospitals, businesses, and communities across our nation." She looked out at the assembled crowd, recognizing faces from her 2 years of veteran engagement. 2 years ago, I thought remembrance meant looking backward with gratitude. I've learned that true remembrance means looking forward with commitment, ensuring that the values our fallen heroes died defending continue to flourish through the lives and service of those who survived. After the formal ceremony, Isabella spent hours moving through the crowd in informal conversations that had become the most meaningful part of her royal duties. She caught up with program participants, met family members, and learned about new challenges and opportunities in the veteran community. She found Jennifer Walsh, the former sergeant who had lost her arm in Afghanistan and was now teaching advanced manufacturing. Jennifer was accompanied by 5 of her former students who had started their own precision engineering company after completing her training program. "Your Majesty," Jennifer said proudly, "these brilliant people have created jobs for 15 other veterans while building a business that serves major aerospace companies. They're proving that veteran-owned businesses aren't charity projects. They're competitive enterprises that strengthen the British economy." Isabella spent time with the young entrepreneurs, learning about their business model and expansion plans. What impressed her most was how they had created a workplace culture that valued military experience while welcoming civilian employees, fostering the kind of civilian-military integration that strengthened both communities. Her next encounter was with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had left teaching to become the director of family services for the initiative. Sarah had just returned from a conference in Canada, where she had presented the British model for veteran family support to international military leaders. "Your Majesty, the global interest in our approach is extraordinary. 7 countries are implementing modified versions of our programs, and NATO has requested a comprehensive manual of our best practices." Isabella was pleased, but not surprised by the international attention. The program's emphasis on economic benefits rather than charitable sympathy had created a replicable model that could adapt to different national contexts and military cultures. "Sarah, what have you learned from the international comparisons?" The most important insight is that successful veteran transition programs require long-term commitment rather than short-term interventions. Countries that treat veteran support as an ongoing investment rather than a temporary expense achieve much better outcomes. Isabella's afternoon continued with visits to display booths representing different aspects of the program's expansion. The Mental Health Center had established satellite locations in 6 cities and was training civilian therapists to better serve veteran patients. The employment program had developed partnerships with universities that provided degree completion opportunities for veterans whose military service had interrupted their education. At the education display, Isabella met Captain Patricia Hayes, who had left military intelligence to pursue a doctorate in cybersecurity. Patricia was completing her dissertation while working part-time as a consultant for companies developing security systems for critical infrastructure. "Your Majesty, the program's education benefits allowed me to transition from protecting military assets to protecting civilian infrastructure. My military experience gives me insights into vulnerabilities that purely academic cybersecurity experts might miss." Isabella was fascinated by how Patricia had translated her military expertise into civilian applications that serve national security interests in new ways. "Patricia, you're demonstrating that veteran transitions can strengthen national security rather than reducing military capability." "Exactly, Your Majesty. The skills military service develops don't become obsolete when we take off the uniform. They just serve different missions." Isabella's final formal appointment was a private meeting with General Morrison to review the program's impact on military recruitment and retention. The general had prepared a comprehensive report showing how veteran support programs affected military career decisions among current service members. "Your Majesty, the data is remarkable. When young people see that military service enhances rather than limits civilian career prospects, they're more willing to enlist. Current service members report significantly less anxiety about their eventual transitions, which improves both performance and retention." Isabella studied the recruitment and retention statistics, noting improvements across all military branches and demographic groups. "General, what does this suggest about the relationship between veteran support and military readiness?" "Supporting veterans is national security policy, Your Majesty. When military personnel know their service will be valued and supported after discharge, it strengthens their commitment during active duty. The program has created a virtuous cycle that benefits both current military capabilities and civilian society. As the formal day concluded, Isabella attended a private reception for program participants and their families. The gathering was held in a Westminster hotel, but the atmosphere was more like a family reunion than a royal event. Veterans, spouses, children, program staff, and volunteers mingled in conversations that reflected the genuine relationships the initiative had fostered. Isabella moved through the reception without formal protocol, engaging in the kind of authentic conversations that had become her preferred style of royal engagement. She met children who were proud of their parents' military service and civilian achievements. She spoke with employers who had discovered that hiring veterans improved their company's performance and culture. She listened to volunteers who found meaning in supporting veteran transitions. But the most moving conversation of the evening was with Tommy Williams' father, Robert, who introduced Isabella to his grandson. Tommy's son, who had been only 2 years old when his father died in Afghanistan. "Your Majesty," Robert said, "this is Tommy Jr. He's 8 now, and he understands that his father was a hero who helped people. But more importantly, he knows that his grandfather is also a hero who continues helping people." Isabella knelt down to speak with Tommy Jr., a bright boy who clearly adored his grandfather. "Tommy, are you proud of your grandfather's work helping other families?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Grandpa says Dad will be happy that sad families become happy families again. I help Grandpa, sometimes by drawing pictures for the other children whose daddies are in heaven." Isabella felt tears forming as she recognized the healing that had occurred in this family over the past 2 years. Robert's grief had transformed into purpose, and his grandson was learning that service to others was the best way to honor those who had died serving their country. As the evening wound down, Isabella stepped outside onto the hotel's terrace overlooking the Thames. The river reflected the lights of London, and she could see Westminster Abbey in the distance, where the field of remembrance would remain until the poppies were collected for next year's ceremony. King Henry joined her on the terrace, having attended the latter part of the reception. "Isabella, I've been watching you work the room. This isn't royal duty anymore. It's genuine relationship building." Isabella smiled, thinking about all the faces she had seen throughout the day. "Henry, 2 years ago, I thought my role was to represent the Crown's support for veterans. I've learned that my real role is to facilitate connections between veterans and the broader society that benefits from their continued service." They stood together in comfortable silence, reflecting on how the Royal Veterans Initiative had evolved beyond its original scope to become a model for authentic royal engagement with social issues. "Isabella, what's next for the program?" "Sustainability, Henry. We've proven that supporting veterans creates economic and social benefits for everyone. Now we need to ensure these programs continue regardless of political changes or economic pressures." Isabella had spent months working with government officials, business leaders, and veteran organizations to develop funding and governance structures that could survive leadership transitions and economic cycles. The goal was to institutionalize veteran support as a permanent feature of British society rather than a temporary royal initiative. As they returned to Buckingham Palace, Isabella thought about the promise she had made to herself at Westminster 2 years earlier. She had vowed to ensure that the veteran stories she heard would translate into meaningful action. That promise had been kept, but it had also evolved into something more comprehensive and enduring. The Royal Veterans Initiative had become more than a support program. It was a demonstration that authentic royal leadership could create lasting social change by building bridges between institutions and individuals, between military and civilian communities, between tradition and innovation. Isabella fell asleep that night thinking about all the lives that had been transformed through the program. Not just veteran participants, but their families, employers, communities, and the civilian volunteers who had discovered meaning through service to those who had served their country. But she was most proud of what the program had taught her about the true nature of royal duty. Effective leadership meant listening more than speaking, learning more than teaching, and using privilege as a platform for amplifying voices that might otherwise go unheard. The veterans had taught her that service doesn't end with formal duty, it simply changes form. Isabella's service as queen consort would continue evolving, but it would always be grounded in the lessons she had learned from the brave men and women who had taught her that the greatest honor comes not from receiving gratitude, but from proving worthy of the trust placed in those who serve something greater than themselves. 2 years after a simple ceremony had changed her life, Isabella understood that the most meaningful remembrance was not looking backward with sadness, but looking forward with determination to ensure that sacrifice and service continued to have meaning in a world worth protecting.